On a cold winter night, a woman stands outside the home she once called hers, watching through the window as her husband celebrates with someone else. Laughing, smiling, living the life they were supposed to share. Betrayed, abandoned, and left to rebuild from nothing, she could have disappeared into the shadows of heartbreak. But instead she chooses something different. Step by step, she transforms pain into strength, silence into determination, and loss into the beginning of a powerful comeback. Because sometimes the moment you are pushed out of someone's life is the exact moment you begin creating a better one. Value and lesson: never underestimate the power of resilience. When life breaks your heart, it may also be giving you the chance to rediscover your strength and rebuild a future that truly belongs to you. If this story inspired you, please support the channel with one like and one share to help us keep bringing more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The video stream from the Palo Alto laboratory flickered and died, but the silence that flooded the room was a crushing weight. Ava's world had just been fractured by the raw neural data she had intercepted. Her husband's face, open with a warmth she hadn't felt in years, directed at another woman who was also visibly pregnant. He was admiring a holographic ultrasound projection, a private moment meant only for the two of them. At 34 weeks pregnant, standing alone in their San Francisco smart home, she had just witnessed a live feed of her tech billionaire husband whispering to his lead AI developer. In that single, damning image, Ava understood a devastating truth. Paige wasn't just his prodigy, she was carrying his child too. The commands she would issue in the next few hours were about to trigger the catastrophic collapse of $1 trillion global tech empire before the fog burned off the Golden Gate Bridge. But what Julian Croft failed to realize was that his wife hadn't been lost in a blissful dream of decorating a nursery for the past 6 months. She had been running diagnostics. As the architect who designed their fortress-like home, she was flagging anomalous data packets, tracing encrypted server pings, and documenting every ghost protocol he used to cover his tracks. The woman he had dismissed as nesting and overly sensitive was about to execute a kill script on his entire life's work. She terminated the feed with a single silent command. There were no frantic texts, no shattered glass, no warning at all. By morning, Julian Croft would lose everything: his company, his patents, his reputation, and his freedom. This is the story of how a woman's quiet systems check became the most destructive data breach in the world. The lesson and value this story shares is a reminder that the most underestimated user often has root access to the entire system. Sometimes, the people everyone assumes are disconnected are the ones about to pull the plug. Your value is never a subroutine in someone else's code. It is the master program you write when they try to comment you out. The meaning of this story is this: every woman who has ever been made to feel like an aesthetic feature in her own life will see herself in Ava. Every person who has been manipulated, deceived, or made to feel paranoid for trusting their own data will feel their conclusions validated in these chapters. This story is proof that you are never too corrupted to be restored from a backup. You are never too lost to write your own source code again. And your input, no matter how long it has been ignored, can eventually become the central processing command. The greatest victory isn't in deleting your enemy, it's in deploying your own truth. The reflection in the polished obsidian of the server rack showed a stranger's face the moment Ava processed the betrayal. The stillness in the smart home was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the cooling fans in the basement, a sound that seemed to echo her own internal overload. 1,000 feet below, the lights of the city twinkled, entirely unaware. Ava felt a light year away from all of them. Her focus was locked on the wall-sized screen, a feature of the Ethelred home network that was supposed to give him oversight of his assets, but had instead intercepted a private test stream from the company's main lab. On Julian, on his expression, on Paige's body. Their home, perched atop the city, was a cold gallery of brushed metal and reinforced glass, running on $30 million of proprietary security she had designed. The priceless digital art installations, which Ava once loved, now shifted on walls that felt like a firewall. This was the command center of Ethelred AI, the crown jewel of Silicon Valley. And on its own secure network, her husband was being broadcast, designing a new family with his pregnant colleague. She replayed the data stream in her mind. 1, 2, 3 seconds. His smile was authentic as he murmured, "Our little one is going to reprogram the world, just like their mother." A signal of pure, unfirewalled admiration. Ava recognized that emotional signature. It was the one Julian projected when he was truly inspired, completely captivated. He hadn't spoken about their child with that kind of reverence in months. A soft chime sounded from a nearby wall panel, a notification from her digital assistant. It was a phantom process, blindly executing its code. It couldn't compute her devastation. Nothing could. The city below, the world outside, had already moved on, already forgotten the pregnant woman whose entire reality had just been revealed as a fabrication. The soft silk of Ava's maternity robe was stretched tight over her belly. 34 weeks, almost 9 months, carrying Julian Croft's heir. She laid a hand over the curve of her stomach, and the baby answered with a sudden kick, as if sensing the systemic crash in their world. She picked up her tablet, unlocked it, stared at the glowing grid of system controls, locked it, unlocked it again. What was the contingency plan for this? Send him an encrypted link to the raw data feed? A sarcastic bug report for the security team. Croft is streaming his affair. Is this a new feature? She locked the tablet. There wasn't a crisis management protocol in the world that could patch this. The memory of Genevieve Croft's voice surfaced in her mind. Julian's mother was a venture capitalist who ruled Silicon Valley like a queen, chic, formidable, and leaving a trail of failed startups in her wake. Her words from the last tech summit wrapped around Ava like fiber optic cable. Market perception is the only metric that matters, my dear, Genevieve had said, her voice as smooth as $100 scotch. Data can be spun. A good story is impossible to short. Did you see it? Ava whispered, a ghost in her own machine. I intercepted the stream. He's having another baby with Paige. The memory of Genevieve's perfectly composed hand on her arm was a phantom input. Her smile in her mind's eye was flawless. Whatever data you think you captured, it lacks context. Croft women are assets. Croft women do not create bad press. Croft women smile, secure the next round of funding, and ensure the family brand remains dominant. But I saw it. You saw a corrupted data packet, Genevieve's memory insisted. The imagined smile turned to ice. Now, you are going to be the brilliant, supportive wife of a genius. You are carrying the legacy of this company. You will not allow yourself to become a security risk. The memory of Genevieve dissolved, leaving Ava utterly alone in the sprawling, silent house. She glided through the cavernous living space, a specter in her own architectural design. She passed Julian's holographic patent awards, shimmering on a floating display. She passed dynamic portraits of them, smiling in a life that was a meticulously managed branding campaign. She passed images with tech moguls, with senators, with the architects of the modern world, all faces from a reality that was no longer hers. None of them could see her now. She was Julian's wife, Julian's pregnant wife, a beautiful feature in the grand product launch of his spectacular life. She found her tablet and placed a secure call to Laura, her sister. The one person who had never been impressed by Julian's charismatic keynotes, a cybersecurity expert who understood that every public-facing interface has a back-end vulnerability. Her sister's voice was sharp, instantly alert, even in the middle of the night. "Ava, your channel is encrypted. What's the exploit?" Lara cut straight to the issue, her tone hardening. "What's the vulnerability?" "I need a clean slate." "What's the vulnerability?" "I just need to get off the network. Right now, Lara." Lara didn't ask again. She didn't need the logs. She just said, "Don't move. I'm initiating a ghost protocol. It'll be at the geothermal service exit in 5 minutes. Be ready." Ava turned toward the door. The long, minimalist white hallway of the smart home seemed to stretch into an infinite, dark server aisle. Each step felt like wading through lines of corrupted code, through the wreckage of the life she thought she was building. To get to the elevator, she had to pass his home office. He was still in there, his face on the giant screen. Still on the same stream, his voice buzzing with excitement. He was laughing, sharing his vision, outlining a roadmap. The feed showed him looking at Paige with that same unguarded awe. Proprietary, an act of claiming her as his own. The way he used to look at Ava before she became just another integrated feature of his portfolio. Ava slipped past the open door. She was close enough to smell the faint scent of his expensive cologne, close enough to hear him say, "Paige, this new prototype is, you are a true visionary." He didn't look up. He didn't sense his pregnant wife walking past, just a few feet away. He didn't notice her at all. God, I was so naive, Ava thought. The data points had been everywhere. The frequent all-nighters at the lab. The encrypted channel he kept for sensitive R&D. The way his explanations had become increasingly complex, like obfuscated code. She had seen 1,000 system warnings and had convinced herself they were just the price of innovation. She reached the door. The private elevator arrived with a soft hum. The cool, recycled air from the tunnels below rushed in. It felt like a deep system reboot, clearing a corrupted cache. At the threshold, she looked back. One final glance at the perfect smart home, the museum-quality digital art, the bespoke furnishings at the closed door of her husband's office, where he was designing a new life with another woman. Julian chuckled again. His real chuckle. The one Amelia once thought was meant only for her. The one she now realized was just another asset he used to charm an investor. The doors to their Beacon Hill brownstone clicked shut behind her. A discreet black SUV was idling at the curb. The driver, a woman with a placid, capable air, opened the rear door. Her gaze was professional, but held a trace of compassion. "Amelia, I'm from your brother's firm." Amelia paused. She could turn around, go back inside to the curated life she knew, to the man who treated her like a priceless acquisition, to the nursery she had spent months perfecting, because Julian was always on the verge of a medical breakthrough. No, not this time. Never again. "My brother's office, please," she said, her voice firm. The driver nodded. "I have the location." Amelia settled into the soft leather seat. She pulled the door closed herself. The SUV moved away from the historic brick facade with the quiet hum of an electric engine. The lights of the Boston skyline began to smear across the window. The sound of his ambition, his charisma, his deception, it all started to fade into white noise. Amelia placed both hands on her stomach. The baby was quiet, as if it were listening, waiting to see what she would do next. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, a hand resting protectively on her belly. "I promise you, I'm going to make this right." But Amelia Croft wasn't fleeing to a shelter. She was not about to crumble. The part of her life where she played the adoring, supportive wife to a biotech visionary was officially over. She was on her way to initiate a full-scale corporate takedown. The glowing spire of the Prudential Tower pierced the dark sky. Amelia watched as the city lights melted into rivers of liquid gold. Her phone buzzed. Julian's picture illuminated the screen. She let it ring. A second call followed instantly, then a third. She caught the driver's eyes in the rear-view mirror, a brief flicker of professional neutrality, but the woman remained silent. An excellent driver knows how to become part of the car. The phone stopped, then lit up with a text. Julian, the FDA advisory panel just concluded. Where are you? The security log shows you left 20 minutes ago. She stared at the message. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then retreated. How could she possibly type the truth? I saw the suppressed clinical trial data. I saw the research grant you funneled to her private lab. I saw the look you gave her at the Biogen conference. The one that was once reserved for me. She darkened the screen. Let him wonder. The SUV glided past the sprawling Longwood Medical Area, the future site of the Croft Innovation Campus, a monument to his hubris. The memory was a physical shock. Amelia had been right there, by his side, for the lab's inauguration ceremony. He had called her his inspiration in front of the assembled press. Together, we are building a healthier future for this world, he had declared, his voice ringing with sincerity. A new era of medicine. That was only 6 months ago, before the endless, late-night lab sessions, before the encrypted hard drives, before Dr. Evelyn Reed, the brilliant biochemist, was brought on as a lead researcher. Amelia had looked her up. 34, a genius, a predator in a lab coat, a carefully managed professional image, no personal social media, no candid photos. It was like her private existence was kept in a classified file. Back then, Amelia had admired it as the sign of a serious scientist, someone dedicated to their work. Now she knew the real reason you don't need an online social life when you are secretly building one inside someone else's marriage, when you're the other woman. The file was open on her tablet. Her fingers shook as it hovered over the icon, a PDF of the real clinical trial results, a hidden payment ledger, an impossible travel expense report. Oh God, he knew. He knew the risk and he let me take the supplement. The thought hit Amelia like a physical blow. The world swam her own. Baby gave a sharp, definitive kick, a tiny protest against the tidal wave of cold dread that swept through her. Julian. The driver's voice was soft. Should I find a place to stop, Mrs. Croft? No, she managed to say, her voice thin. Just keep driving. She forced herself to take a deep, shuddering breath in through her nose and out through her mouth, just like the instructor had taught them in the birthing class, the one she had attended by herself because Julian had a sudden emergency with the Phase 3 trials. A new message lit up the screen. Julian, are you all right? You should have told me you weren't feeling well. The absolute audacity, the stunning hypocrisy, he had hardly looked at her. The entire evening had not asked about her. Last checkup had not mentioned the nursery a single time. He had done nothing a caring husband or an expectant father should do, and now he was putting on a performance of concern. She thought of all the nights she had lain awake, listening for his car, in the driveway, smelling the faint, antiseptic scent of a laboratory on his suits, and telling herself it was just the stress of his work, that she was being overly sensitive, that pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid, and that she should be grateful for the incredible life he gave her. The prenuptial agreement, she had found it 3 months ago in his office, locked in a biometric safe. He said it contained proprietary formulas, but Julian didn't lie. He curated the truth. she had used the override code her brother, a senior partner in biotech litigation, had given her for emergencies, a security measure she never imagined she would use against her own husband. The prenup was a 90-page monster of legalese, but one paragraph practically glowed on the screen. Section 7, the Public Trust Clause, in the event of a felony conviction, or FD, a debarment, stemming from acts of gross negligence or willful misconduct that result in catastrophic damage to the family's public standing, the non-implicated spouse shall be granted a 75% controlling interest in Croft Pharmaceuticals, superseding all other claims. When they signed it, Julian had waved the clause off as a technicality insisted upon by his venture capital partners. He swore it was just standard language that would never apply, because his ethics were his bond, and she had believed him. She had signed it without a second thought. She had trusted the man who talked about curing disease while sliding a 5-carat Asher-cut diamond onto her finger. I was so blind, so desperate for the stability I never had growing up, that I deliberately looked away from every red flag. Amelia opened an encrypted app on her tablet. The icon was a simple graphic of a helix. Inside was the dossier she had been secretly compiling for 2 months, the unredacted clinical data from his server, the damning emails from a whistleblower inside his lab, and the falsified safety reports for the new supplement that he had ordered hidden. She had not been losing her mind. She had been building her case after finding the prenup she'd called her father, Harrison, a retired federal judge. The same man who had looked over the initial incorporation papers for Croft Pharmaceuticals as a favor years before she and Julian had even met. She had asked him hypothetical questions about FDA regulations, about shareholder lawsuits, about what could theoretically happen if a wife discovered her pharmaceutical CEO husband was a white-collar criminal. Harrison's hypothetical advice had been chillingly specific. Another text from Julian. I am starting to get genuinely worried. Amelia, please pick up your phone. She wrote a reply, and this time she hit, Send Amelia. I'm fine. I just needed to get some air. It was true in a sense, but it was also a galaxy away from the entire truth. It was a calculated delay. His response was immediate. Julian, come home. We have the Biomedical Innovation Gala in the morning. The gala, the ultimate public relations, play Boston's philanthropic power couple, presenting a check for $2 million to a university medical school, all while one of them was committing a monstrous fraud against the public. Because that was the other secret Amelia had found, the crime that made his affair feel almost trivial. Project Nightingale, his breakthrough prenatal supplement, was a conspiracy to market a product with falsified safety data, hiding its link to severe birth defects from the very families who trusted him. Her brother had helped her track the payments to offshore labs that faked the results. A digital forensics expert he'd hired confirmed the authenticity of the whistleblower's emails her father had helped her organize. The evidence into an airtight, legal argument. They had been shielding her, equipping her, constructing a legal fortress around her in ways she was only now beginning to understand. Amelia, I'm going to my father's on the Cape. I'm not feeling well. She powered down the phone, severing the last digital tether to the life she thought she had. The SUV moved through the quiet, sleeping suburbs, a 24-hour convenience store, a park with still swings, a town green with a small war memorial, normal places for normal people who had no clue that Amelia Croft's perfectly designed world had not just been shattered. Perhaps it had been reforged, because the proof she carried was not just for a divorce attorney, it was for the Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Justice enough to utterly destroy him, seize his company, annihilate his name, and take away his liberty. For decades, the data on her tablet would not just end a marriage, It would bring down a biotech giant. Amelia leaned her head against the cool window. The baby inside her was finally calm. Her own shaking began to stop. The tears would not come. She was done wasting tears on him. She had dedicated too much of her existence to being an object, a refined accessory he deemed elegant, a conduit for producing a successor, a valuable counterpart for his public image. That was over. Just another 45 minutes until they reached the lake house. 45 more minutes to meticulously go over the plan for the utter ruin of Marcus Thorne. Eleanor shut her eyes, not for rest, but for concentration. The porch light was illuminated, a comforting glow against the dense Michigan wilderness. Harrison always switched it on when he anticipated her arrival. The structure of wood and stone stood as the complete opposite of their sterile, glass-walled penthouse, overlooking the river, filled instead with warm timber and shelves overflowing with books. The very tire swing her grandfather had fastened to the massive oak tree 5 decades prior was still hanging in the humid night air. This felt authentic, a genuine home, not some cold exhibition space governed by expensive art and unspoken regulations. Alex navigated the car along the meandering driveway, the gentle sound of gravel crunching breaking the stillness as he turned off the ignition. "Should I wait, Mrs. Croft?" he inquired, his voice low. "No, thank you, Alex. I will phone when I require transportation back to the city. If I ever decide to return," she added silently. The main door opened before she could even take the first step. Edward was standing in the doorway, 70 years of age, his silver hair impeccably combed, wearing a heavy wool cardigan over his button-down shirt. His spectacles were pushed up onto his forehead. "You have arrived," Edward stated. It was neither a query nor a salutation, but a straightforward acknowledgement of her presence. Nina proceeded up the stone walkway. Her ankles were puffy, and a persistent pain had taken root in her lower back. The infant suddenly seemed colossal, a substantial weight on the verge of entering a world that had just been shattered. As she reached her father, the iron self-control she had held on to for the last several hours finally gave way. The sobs she had stifled in the penthouse and in the car, the tears she had refused to let fall for weeks, erupted. Edward enveloped her in an embrace, remaining silent, simply holding her firmly as she wept onto his shoulder. The wind gusted off Lake Michigan, making the windows of the historic Lincoln Park brownstone vibrate. An L train clattered by in the background, a familiar urban score. The air was frigid, a jolt to her senses. "All right, Izzy," Evelyn said, her tone soft yet resolute. "Let's get a pot of coffee brewing. You appear to be frozen solid." The kitchen served as the home's nexus, a contemporary area nestled within a classic framework. Stainless steel appliances shone under recessed lights, and the atmosphere was a mix of fresh espresso and the scent of old paper from the myriad books that filled the walls. Evelyn, a woman who operated with the calm deliberateness of a grand master, ground the beans, prepared the machine, and retrieved 2 substantial ceramic mugs from a cupboard she had constructed herself. Izzy slumped onto a stool at the enormous granite island, the exact place where she had painstakingly mapped out her college applications, admitted she was abandoning pre-med for architecture, and declared her whirlwind engagement to Julian Croft. Her mother had maintained a quiet reservation. Evelyn had asked measured, sensible questions that Isabella, giddy with affection, had dismissed. What is his 5-year strategy, Izzy? What are his principles when he's under pressure? Izzy's own gut feeling had been a quiet hum of doubt, but she had disregarded it, completely enchanted by the magnetic founder of Nexus AI, the man who vowed to construct the future alongside her. "I should have heeded you," she mumbled, speaking to her mother, and to the faint alarms in her own head that warned her something about his flawless world was built upon a compromised foundation. The espresso machine hissed, and then sputtered, its deep fragrance saturating the space. Evelyn poured the dark brew into the mugs, and they sat in the low drone of the refrigerator. The digital display on the oven glowed, tracking the passage of time with silent accuracy. The vapor from the coffee warmed Izzy's face as her mother slid a mug in her direction. She clutched it, its warmth a minor solace. "Mom," her voice faltered, "I have something to tell you." "I'm aware, my dear." Isabella glanced up, a knot forming in her stomach. "You're aware?" Evelyn crossed the room to her office, returned with a tablet, and set it down on the island. The screen lit up, revealing a sophisticated file system. "I dedicated 30 years of my life as a forensic accountant, unraveling the finances of corporate felons. I can spot a manipulated ledger from a mile away. Sweetheart, your husband's enterprise isn't merely forward thinking. It's a house of cards." Isabella could only gaze at the screen, at folders designated with obscure acronyms. "You knew? This entire time?" "I had my suspicions. Then I began to investigate. And then I was certain," Evelyn stated, tapping on a file. "Nexus AI's whole foundational algorithm, the very one that landed their latest round of investment, it was plagiarized, bit for bit, from a competing firm, as were their fourth quarter and first quarter performance forecasts. That massive government contract he recently secured? The demonstration he presented was based on stolen data. It will never perform as he claimed." The lines of code and internal communications on the screen blurred in front of Isabella's eyes. She had registered Julian's obsession with security, his evasive replies about his chief programmers, but witnessing her mother's systematic deconstruction of the deception made it tangible and horrifying. "Why didn't you inform me?" she whispered. "Because you would not have taken my word for it," Evelyn replied, her voice softening with understanding. "You needed to discover the exit on your own. I could only reveal what was waiting on the other side. Or you would be defending him, asserting that I'm overstating the issue, attributing it to my architectural skepticism or my pregnancy hormones." Isabella offered no rebuttal. She recognized the truth in it. She had justified Julian's fanatical work schedule, his abrupt server upgrade, excursions to Seattle, his ruthless methods for recruiting talent. "There is more," Evelyn continued. She swiped to another folder, expense filings, encrypted conversations, pictures from a corporate function, a woman with dark hair sharing a laugh with Julian. Anya Petrova is not simply the principal data scientist at his main rival, Izzy. Isabella's breath hitched in her throat. "What are you implying?" She has been supplying him with proprietary code for 18 months. He has been compensating her through a shell company disguised as a consulting agency. And judging by his schedule and her encrypted messages to a friend, she is approximately 4 months pregnant. Evelyn allowed the revelations to sink in, each piece of information a deliberately placed burden. Pregnant. His weekend getaways to unwind in the Bay Area were actually strategy meetings with her. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The sleek smartphone fell from Isabella's grasp, its screen fracturing into a spiderweb pattern as it struck the slate floor. She hardly registered it. Another child. Julian was expecting another child, a whole clandestine partnership, a life of professional and personal deceit, operating concurrently with the one he was building with her. No. The word was a choked utterance. He would never. "We possess the server records." Evelyn's voice was detached, the same tone she employed when giving testimony in a courtroom. He funneled the payments via an untraceable crypto wallet, but he became careless. "I traced it back to a venture fund under his control. The data transmissions, the affair, it is all documented in the metadata. Anya Petrova is carrying his child. A frigid wave enveloped Isabella. She instinctively cradled her own abdomen. The baby she believed was the foundation of their future, Julian's firstborn. She was carrying his second child by a woman he was actively cheating on her with. How many other security measures had Julian Croft circumvented in his life? Her name is Anya, Evelyn said, her voice gentle once more. She is due in May. Last month, when Julian informed you he was attending a tech conference in Tokyo, he was with her in a leased house in Big Sur, planning how to incorporate the last piece of stolen code before the initial public offering. The live stream he had sent her. It must have been a pre-recorded segment. She had viewed it, feeling proud and radiant. She had accepted every single word. The most nauseating realization was that a small, rational part of her mind, the part that drew up blueprints, had consistently recognized that the groundwork was flawed. "What should I do?" Isabella asked, her voice sounding distant in the high-ceilinged kitchen. "That, my dear, is completely your decision." Evelyn powered down the tablet. "You can return to that glass penthouse. Act as if you never witnessed any of this. Have your child, play the role of the ideal tech tycoon's wife, and await the certain collapse. Or," Evelyn's gaze was piercing, "or you can retaliate. You can leverage everything within these files to unmask him, sabotage his IPO, annihilate his reputation, and ensure he is held accountable for every line of code he pilfered and every falsehood he uttered." Isabella looked at her mother, the woman who had raised her single-handedly, who had confronted corporate giants armed with nothing more than a calculator and the truth, who had instilled in her the lesson that the most crucial element of any structure is its integrity, and to never, ever place your trust in a man who conceals his entire existence from his partner. "There is something else," Isabella said, a cold resolution hardening in her voice. "Something he had me look over. The Series C investment contract, the key person clause." "You located it?" A trace of pride appeared on Evelyn's face. "The venture capitalists insisted on it. Should the chief executive officer be found culpable of gross misconduct, corporate espionage, or any action that subjects the company to significant public disgrace, the board retains the right to immediately dismiss him and reclaim all of his vested shares." Julian had dismissed it as mere standard legal text. He has no inkling that they can seize everything. No, his father was a dealmaker, not a grandmaster. He never taught Arthur the difference between audacity and arrogance. Beatrice shook her head. He completely misjudged his son's talent for self-immolation. Eleanor's baby wasn't Arthur's only secret on the horizon. That wasn't even the bedrock of his betrayal. And by the time the London Stock Exchange opened on Monday, Arthur Vance wouldn't just be losing a wife. He would be losing his entire empire. The smart display on the mantel glowed 3 a.m. Eleanor hadn't slept. Her body was heavy with exhaustion, but her mind was sharper than it had been in months. The mahogany desk in the study had become her war room, covered with laptops and confidential printouts. Beatrice had spent hours systematically creating a timeline, connecting offshore payments to encrypted data packets and private jet manifests. She worked with a quiet, methodical intensity. "I've been tracking Vance Capital's trading patterns for an anti-corruption watchdog," Beatrice confessed, her voice hushed. "For half a year, Ellie. I was going to bring it to you. I was just trying to build an argument that was completely bulletproof." "Everyone was trying to shield me," Eleanor said, her tone flat and cold. "Everyone but the man I pledged my life to." Eleanor presented her final findings: doctored trade logs, ghost servers routed through Monaco to hide latency, and encrypted messages that laid out the entire conspiracy. "The financial crime is so much worse than the affair, Eleanor," Beatrice said. Vance Capital has been a criminal organization from its inception. Ever since Arthur's father forced out his co-founder, he's used the firm to run a predictive algorithm, front-running the market on an international scale. He has artificially inflated the fund's value by a minimum of £500 million. The majority of that was being siphoned into his and Chloe's offshore accounts, getting it ready for after the initial public offering. Eleanor stared at the intricate map of lies, of clandestine server farms and data havens from the Cayman Islands to Zurich. How did the auditors or the regulators never discover this? She asked. They did, Beatrice answered, opening a new file. These were compliance officers and quantitative analysts who flagged trades that were statistically impossible. Every last one was either bought off with a silent partnership and a vicious non-disclosure agreement or professionally destroyed within 6 months. 2 attempted to go to the Financial Conduct Authority. Their careers were simply deleted. Deleted? The Vance family has deep roots in the city. Arthur's grandfather practically invented modern financial lobbying. Beatrice's voice was bleak. When you command that much wealth, you can edit any reality that you don't like. I was owed more than a perfectly constructed fiction. I was owed the truth. The realization solidified in Eleanor's mind, a single point of light in the wreckage of her life. Beatrice returned from the adjoining room, carrying a different encrypted tablet. I located the legal planning documents. What documents? Eleanor asked, her voice sounding far away. The ones Arthur's legal team uploaded to a hidden partition on his personal server just last week. Beatrice's expression was stone. He was planning to serve you with divorce papers the morning after your baby shower. He was preparing to file for full custody, claiming prenatal emotional instability as the grounds. The study fell completely silent, filled only with the faint whir of electronics. Even Beatrice, who had just been mapping out a web of global financial fraud, looked utterly horrified. He was going to try and take my child from me, Eleanor whispered, the words catching in her throat. He was going to make the attempt, Beatrice confirmed, placing the tablet on the antique desk. His lawyers have been compiling a file. Your panic attack before the G7 summit, the time you collapsed from exhaustion at the hospital fundraiser, the prescription for anti-anxiety medication you filled 4 months ago. Eleanor remembered that prescription. She had been experiencing crushing panic attacks, waking up at 3 a.m., convinced the global markets were collapsing, her heart pounding against her ribs. Arthur had been the one who pushed her to see a specialist, recommending a performance psychologist who was a legend among London's financial elite. A psychologist who, it was now sickeningly clear, was forwarding every confidential session summary straight to Arthur's solicitors. It was a hostile acquisition, she said, the insight striking her like a physical force. Our entire marriage. He never desired a partner. He wanted a legacy bearer from a respected family, a wife who looked flawless at galas and was too disconnected from his business to ever challenge the financials, and someone without the capital to challenge him in a legal battle, Beatrice added grimly. Your family has a distinguished name, but you don't possess Vance-level resources. He banked on you taking a payout and disappearing without a fight. He had made a monumental error in judgment. Eleanor pointed to her own screen, where a complex data visualization program showed a perfectly correlated timeline. I have the satellite telemetry from his own aircraft positioning him in Zurich on the days he claimed to be at a summit in Singapore. I have transcribed audio of him directing his lawyers to subpoena my private medical records. I have the blockchain transaction for a penthouse bought in Chloe's name that was most certainly not for our future. The software linked every piece of it together. She looked at her sister and her mother, the 2 women holding her steady as her universe disintegrated. Between the 3 of us, We have more than enough evidence to incinerate his entire legacy. The only unresolved issue is how scorched we want the earth to be when we are finished. The digital clock on the mantel read 3:30 in the morning. The holographic flames in the hearth cast a warm, dancing light across the room. Outside, the London drizzle was starting to subside, leaving the city lights shimmering on the wet pavement below. Eleanor's phone, which she had switched on an hour ago, vibrated ceaselessly on the marble side table. 16 missed calls from Arthur, 12 voicemails, 27 text messages, their content evolving from condescending concern to raw, unrestrained anger, and finally to thinly veiled threats. "Play them," Beatrice insisted. "Let's get a record of his mental state." Eleanor put the phone down and activated the speaker. The first message began. "Eleanor, where on earth are you? Your mother mentioned you left the gala early. Call me." He sounded annoyed, but was attempting to conceal it with his usual tone of calm authority. The second message: "I do not enjoy being made to appear like an idiot, Eleanor. That event was crucial for the new foundation launch. Your sudden departure was noted." The mask was slipping. The fifth message: "This is becoming completely irrational. You are allowing your hormones to control your behavior. Whatever narrative you've constructed in your head is based on faulty logic." It was his classic tactic: patronizing condescension. The exact tone he used whenever she caught him in a factual inconsistency. The eighth message: "If you are going to continue to refuse to have a reasonable discussion, I am forced to conclude you are having another episode related to your anxiety. You know what Dr. Evans said about managing your emotional state." The gaslighting was now fully engaged, constructing his argument that she was mentally frail. The 12th and final message: "That settles it. I am documenting this with Dr. Evans. It is obvious the pregnancy is clouding your judgment. You need to return home. Right now." It was pure, calculated manipulation, transforming her own mental health care into a weapon he could wield against her. Beatrice was already making a recording of the audio on her own device. He's cementing his story. If this were to ever go before a judge, he would portray her as delusional from the very start. It will never see the inside of a courtroom. Beatrice's tone was like steel. "We will guarantee he has nothing left to his name but the shame." Eleanor stared at the phone, at the picture of the man she believed she knew, the father of her unborn son, the stranger who had been executing an entirely different strategy behind the scenes of their life for the last 4 years. "Get Mr. Finch on the line," she ordered. "Inform him that the protocol is now active." The call was short. Alistair Finch, their family's solicitor, picked up on the first ring, his voice alert and prepared, even at this hour, as if he had been anticipating the call. "I had a suspicion my phone might ring this evening," he said. "Your prenuptial agreement includes an exceptionally robust criminality clause. With the evidence you now possess, you are entitled to 60% of all combined marital assets." "And the stipulation in the family charter," Eleanor pressed, "the Vance legacy clause, is it completely ironclad?" Alistair had insisted on its inclusion when Arthur's grandfather first drew up the charter. "Any action that brings catastrophic public dishonor to the family name or involves financial felonies automatically voids the primary heir's entire inheritance. The controlling shares in the company, the whole library of algorithm patents, the server network, it all reverts to the charter's designated secondary beneficiary." "Is Arthur aware of this?" "He hasn't the faintest idea. His grandfather kept that clause under strict confidentiality, believing the theoretical threat would be sufficient to keep his descendants from straying without ever having to actually use it." Eleanor glanced at the encrypted folders on her laptop. the proof of systemic market manipulation, the evidence of a double life, the digital footprint of a man whose kingdom was built on a lie. One last thing, Alistair. What becomes of the Vance Foundation if we release the evidence of his financial crimes? The main assets will be seized in a federal inquiry, and any clean funds would be restructured under a new board of directors, Alistair clarified. Alternatively, they could be funneled into a new charitable trust with a new chairperson, someone who could direct that capital toward advancing financial accountability and transparency. Someone like yourself, if you were so inclined. You would possess the legal standing as the aggrieved party, and your past career in investigative journalism would give you immediate credibility. Clara had been one of the most feared investigative reporters in tech before she met Julian. He'd called it her sabbatical, convincing her she deserved a break from the relentless deadlines, that he would provide for them. She now saw it was just another cage, beautifully gilded, which she had mistaken for a sanctuary. Start the sequence, she said, all of it. The divorce filing, the encrypted files to The Verge, and the formal notification to his company's board of directors. I want it all to go live before NASDAQ opens. Confirmed. She terminated the connection. The home office was still, filled only with the quiet whir of servers and the faint murmur of San Francisco coming to life. By sunrise, Clara wasn't just planning to leave her husband, she was orchestrating the systematic takedown of his entire empire. Across the bay, the sky bled from jet black to a bruised, somber violet. A new day was dawning. The longest night of Clara's life was drawing to a close. Her phone lit up again, Julian's name glowing on the screen. She had been rehearsing this confrontation in her mind for hours, dreading every second of it. Take the call, Maya said. Let's see what his first move is. Clara drew a sharp, steadying breath and swiped to accept the call. Where the hell have you been? Julian's voice was clipped, efficient, the tone he reserved for engineers who broke the code base, the tone he was finally, at long last, using on her. I'm fine, Julian, Clara said. That's not the question I asked. My father is losing his mind. You disappeared from the tech gala without a word to anyone. The optics are a disaster. Let them be. An unnerving silence crackled over the line. She could practically picture his mind cycling through algorithms, searching for a new approach, a different leverage point. Clara. His voice dropped, taking on a low, menacing quality. Come home. Now. No. Excuse me? The word felt alien, a glitch in the system, between his sprawling penthouse, overlooking the bay, and the quiet hotel room she'd taken in Sausalito. Clara had never told Julian no. Not a direct no. She'd negotiated. She'd presented alternative data. She'd offered different user cases. But she had never simply refused him. I said no, Julian. For the first time in our entire marriage, I am saying no. And I will never step foot in that penthouse again. She heard a dull thud on his end, the unmistakable sound of a fist hitting an expensive, minimalist desk. Julian had a temper. He presented a calm, data-driven front to the world, but their custom-built furniture knew the truth. You honestly believe you can just walk away? He let out a short, grating laugh. You have zero leverage, Clara. That ironclad prenup you signed leaves you with nothing. You'll be pregnant, blacklisted in the industry, and totally alone. I reviewed the agreement, Julian. All 86 pages. That includes the infidelity clause you called standard legal jargon, because you promised you'd never break my trust. Silence. I also read the key person clause in your Series C funding agreement. The one your lead investor insisted on, the one you've completely forgotten, exists. The silence on the phone grew, becoming almost suffocating. She could hear the frantic whir of his thoughts as he tried to process this new variable, to calculate the potential fallout. Oh, and one more thing, Clara added, her voice chillingly calm. How is your other daughter doing? She must be, what, almost 3 years old now. Little Aria. The one who lives in that charming house in Palo Alto you visit on weekends when you're supposedly at off-site strategy sessions in Austin. The call ended abruptly. Clara looked down at her phone, her hands trembling, her heart racing. But a slow, determined smile began to form on her face. She had just launched the initial attack. Julian had until the opening bell to capitulate. He wouldn't. The following 2 hours were a blur of encrypted messages. Clara's attorney initiated the secure data transfers. Her sister Maya confirmed with the digital forensics expert that his report was ready for release. Clara authorized every single step, giving final approval with a firm tap on her screen. At 6 a.m., she formally submitted the divorce petition. The files arrived simultaneously in the inboxes of Julian's corporate counsel, the members of his board, and the regional office of the SEC. At 6:30, her phone buzzed again. It wasn't Julian. This time it was his father. Marcus Thorne's voice was as cold and unforgiving as the Pacific Current. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Good morning, Marcus. I trust Julian has brought you up to speed on our last conversation. You are making a catastrophic error in judgment. You have no idea what you're dealing with. No, on the contrary, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A tech unicorn built on stolen intellectual property. A husband who started a second family while I was undergoing my third round of IVF. And a patriarch who values his company's stock price more than basic human decency. This will end badly for you. I will personally see to it. You'll see to what? Sue me for libel? Fight me for custody? Try to paint me as an unstable, hormonal woman? Clara's voice was razor sharp. I have a dead man's switch tied to every crime your son has ever committed. For the last 2 years, I have been compiling everything. Encrypted server logs, audio recordings from his home office, and sworn affidavits from the engineers whose careers he destroyed. If anything happens to me or to my child, it all goes public. Every major tech journalist, every broadcast network, and every federal prosecutor in this state gets a copy. Silence. Your son isn't just about to lose his wife, Marcus. He is on the verge of losing his company, his fortune, and his freedom. The only decision you have left is whether or not you want to sync with him. She ended the call before he could formulate a reply. Maya stared at her, her face a mask of shock and awe. I have never, in my entire life, heard you speak to anyone like that. I never had to before, Clara whispered, collapsing onto the sofa. The adrenaline surge was gone, leaving behind a profound weariness that settled deep in her bones, the exhaustion of a person who had been awake for more than 24 hours. Or maybe this is who I've always been. Maybe I've been this furious for years and just became an expert at hiding it. Maya brought her a mug of tea, setting it down gently and resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. That fury is your power, Maya said softly. It means you're finally done letting him make you small. But even as Maya said it, Clara felt the rage begin to ebb, exposing the raw wound beneath it. The anger was armor. Beneath it lay an immeasurable grief for the future she thought she was building. She had genuinely loved Julian, and that was the betrayal that cut the deepest. She'd ignored the mountain of evidence, the late-night emergencies at the data center, the persistent gut feeling she dismissed as pregnancy-induced paranoia. She had fallen in love with the persona he projected, the brilliant, visionary founder changing the world. But that man was an illusion. She was mourning someone who never existed. At 7 a.m, a black Tesla Model X was parked silently at the curb outside Maya's house. Clara peered through the blinds as three figures in sharp, dark suits got out. They were the kind of crisis management consultants Julian kept on retainer to make problems vanish. They walked toward the front door with an air of absolute certainty, ready to manage a hysterical spouse and contain a PR crisis. They were utterly unprepared for the woman waiting inside. Clara opened the door herself. 8 months pregnant, wearing a faded Stanford sweatshirt and yoga pants, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes puffy from a night without sleep. She had never felt so in control. Mrs. Thorne, the leader, a woman who radiated an aura of cold corporate authority. Your husband has asked that you return to the penthouse. He's prepared to be magnanimous about this unfortunate emotional outburst. Magnanimous. A dry, mirthless laugh caught in Clara's throat. I don't require his magnanimity. He also wants you to know that if you insist on this irrational path, he will be forced to countersue for sole custody, citing your current fragile state, the hormonal imbalances of pregnancy, this erratic behavior. Abandoning a major industry gala without any justification, he has partners prepared to attest to your present mental instability. Then he should probably know that I have a digital forensics expert, formerly of the NSA, a senior reporter from TechCrunch, and the most ruthless litigation attorney in Silicon Valley on my side. He should also know that the first domino has already tipped over. The lawyer's composure wavered, a brief flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What domino? All of them, Clara replied, a small, icy smile touching her lips. The divorce petition, which includes geo-tagged data from his secret life. The whistleblower complaint I filed with the SEC detailing fraudulent user metrics. And an official letter to his venture capital partners, invoking the morality clause of their investment agreement. The trio of corporate lawyers shared a look, a silent arc of panic connecting them. Mr. Sterling is prepared to discuss a potential settlement, the lead counsel said, her voice suddenly tight with caution. There's nothing to settle. The reckoning has already begun. Charlotte closed the door on their stunned expressions. From the bay window, she watched them hustle back to their sedan, fingers flying across their phones in a frenzy. The Escalade, however, didn't move. They were holding for new orders. Arthur had until dawn to surrender. The early morning light was just beginning to glance off the glass towers of the financial district. This negotiation was only getting started. They approached her door 3 more times. Each new offer buzzed to her phone, each one exponentially higher than the one before. 10 million, then 25, and a final offer of $50 million to make this whole thing disappear. Charlotte swiped to decline every time. You know, you could take the money, David said. They were in the library, which had become a command center strewn with laptops and legal documents. $50 million would let you go anywhere, have an amazing life. This was never about the money, Charlotte replied, her eyes fixed on the lawyers, pacing on the brick sidewalk, their composure visibly cracking. It's about consequences. Consequences are expensive, David noted, and exhausting. And a lot of the time, they don't stick. Then I'll use every last cent I have to be the exception. A financial news channel was murmuring from a screen in the corner, and David turned up the sound. A correspondent was breathlessly reporting on a major shakeup in the tech sector. We have breaking news that trading on Ether Dynamics stock has been frozen this morning, pending a major internal announcement. Sources close to the situation are hinting at a possible SEC investigation, though both the company and the commission have offered no comment at this time. It was starting. The first hairline fracture in the walls of his kingdom. Marcus Holloway, the chief financial officer for Ether Dynamics, called at 9:30. He was a man Charlotte had exchanged pleasantries with at a dozen galas, a man who always seemed to be bracing for some unseen impact. Charlotte. His voice was a raw, panicked whisper. I need to speak with you. How did you get my personal number? I've had it for about 2 years, since the fundraiser at the MFA. He took a breath. I tried to warn you that night about the ghost algorithms, about what Arthur was doing with those offshore data havens. You didn't pick up on what I was trying to say. She did remember that evening, seeing Mr. Holloway hovering near their group, looking like he wanted to say something before he was swept away by the crowd. She'd assumed he was just intimidated by all the venture capitalists. I understand perfectly now, she told him. I have the server logs. Every single instance of market manipulation he engineered, every regulator he bought off. I've kept a secure private copy for the last 6 years. His voice was a mix of terror and relief. I kept telling myself I had to stay, to protect the young coders who didn't realize their boss was a predator, to try and mitigate the damage to the investors who believed in the company's mission. But it just got worse and worse. So why are you calling me now? Because you're the only one with the resources to make him actually answer for what he's done. Marcus took a shaky breath. And because you were always kind to me at the holiday parties, when most people just looked through me. You asked about my daughter. You remembered her name was Chloe. Charlotte had forgotten those small acts of decency, the last embers of her former self she had fought to keep alive while playing the part of Mrs. Arthur Sterling. I'll give a sworn statement, Holloway said, his voice gaining strength. Anything your legal team needs, I'll hand over. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Thank you. This has been a long time coming. She ended the call. David, her lawyer, was already scribbling on a notepad. The CFO turning state's witness is the silver bullet, David said, his voice buzzing with energy. That's irrefutable evidence. It gives us root access to data that would have taken us years to get with subpoenas. He's also a good man who is about to torch his own career to do the right thing. Charlotte felt a sudden, powerful kinship with him. He spent years trying to fix the company from the inside, the same way I spent years trying to fix our marriage. We were both trying to save a beautiful, intricate machine that was built on a corrupted kernel. The sharp buzz of the intercom sliced through the room, making Charlotte jump. More couriers, probably. More legal threats. More attempts to purchase her silence. But the figure on the video screen was no law clerk. It was Edward Sterling. Arthur's father stood on the damp Beacon Hill sidewalk, the very picture of old-world Boston power in a tailored cashmere coat, holding a slim leather briefcase. Her brother, Ethan, moved to stand in front of her. I really don't think it's a good idea for you to talk to him. I'm not here to make this harder. Edward's voice, tinny through the speaker, was different, thinner, more brittle than Charlotte had ever heard it. I'm here because I need to help. Charlotte stepped around her brother. Why in God's name would you want to help me? For just a second, Edward's formidable composure fractured. It was just long enough for Charlotte to see the profound weariness underneath. Because my grandson deserves to inherit a name that isn't synonymous with fraud. Because I spent my life building an honorable institution, not a criminal enterprise, and I am done watching my son burn it to the ground. Because I know where the ultimate proof is, and it's time someone with a conscience brought it into the light. He held up a small, metallic rectangle, the hardware key to the original cold storage wallet. Decades of dark money, illegal seed funding, technological theft, everything Arthur has been hiding since he staged his takeover. Edward's hand was trembling, almost imperceptibly. I made him a full partner when he was 27. I have been a willing accomplice to his monstrous ambition ever since. Perhaps this is my only chance to atone for that. Charlotte stared at the hardware key on the screen. Why are you doing this now? Why not 6 years ago? Because 6 years ago, I was still blinded by his success, by the skyrocketing valuation, by my own pathetic pride. Edward's eyes were glistening with tears he refused to shed. But my grandson is on his way, and I will not allow him to be raised in the same toxic culture that twisted my own son. It was the most truthful thing Charlotte had ever heard him say. I can't forgive you, Charlotte said, her voice devoid of emotion. For all the years you looked the other way, for every time you told me my job was to be a supportive wife. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to help you clean house. Edward lifted his chin. Anything you require, whatever it takes to dismantle that entire corrupt division, I will provide it, even if it costs me the company I started from scratch. The intercom went quiet. The street outside was still, except for the faint sound of a siren in the distance. Charlotte looked at the image of the key, at her father-in-law's shattered pride, at the life she was about to utterly demolish. No deals, no buyouts, no retreat. Come on up, she said. We have a lot to discuss. They talked for nearly 3 hours, and then Edward was gone. Her lawyer, David, left soon after, and even Ethan retreated to his own study to field calls from his nervous friends. Charlotte was finally alone. She walked into the nursery, its walls painted a calm, cloudy gray in preparation. A modern armchair was stacked with books on childhood development and cognitive science. The window looked out over the Charles River toward Cambridge, the same view she had gazed at a decade ago, dreaming of the life she and Arthur would build together. And she had built it, in a way. A sprawling brownstone, a diamond the size of a robin's egg, a marriage to a celebrated tech genius, a life founded on a brilliant algorithm and a web of lies. The adrenaline was fading. The white-hot rage had cooled to ash. In its place was a vast, hollow ache. Charlotte sat down on the edge of the crib. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of her son moving within. I loved him so much, she whispered to the silent room. My God, I really did. How could I have been so blind? The sobs came then, not the quiet tears of a woman scorned, but agonizing, ugly sounds that were ripped from the very core of her being. It was a tsunami of grief, of shame and betrayal, washing away 4 years of carefully constructed denial. She wept for the life she thought was a modern fairy tale, for the trip to Iceland to see the aurora borealis, for the night he proposed in his tiny MIT lab, promising that together they would build a future that would truly change the world. She wept for the hotel receipts from a boutique hotel in Napa she'd found in a hidden folder on their home server, while he was at a supposed leadership summit in Singapore, for the nursery blueprints he had never bothered to look at, for the beautiful, sunlit room she had designed and overseen herself while he was with Chloe. She wept for the woman she had been before him, an ambitious architect, fiercely passionate about her sustainable designs, content in her quirky, blueprint-filled apartment in the Mission District. That woman had been methodically erased, taken apart, and reassembled to conform to Julian Thorne's world. His relentless schedule, his impossible expectations. At some point, she had stopped being the architect and had become just another decorative feature in his portfolio. The baby kicked, a soft but firm reminder against the storm raging inside Amelia's body. She took a ragged breath, willing her heart to slow down, concentrating on the tiny life that was counting on her to be strong enough to see this through. Her brother Liam showed up in the doorway. He didn't speak, just came over and sat next to her, wrapping her in a solid embrace as her crying began to quiet down. I threw away 4 years, Liam. You didn't throw them away, he said quietly, smoothing her hair. You endured them. That isn't the same thing. I should have seen it. I should have left him after the first time he lied. Perhaps. Or perhaps you needed to arrive at this very spot. This exact point in time when you at last discovered the strength to bring his entire corrupt world crashing down. Liam's voice was low and steady. The Amelia who married him would not have been able to do this. You had to become someone different first. Amelia thought about it. She thought of the young woman who was so impressed by his vision, who believed every excuse because the future he was building seemed so magnificent. That woman was an idealist. That woman was desperate for a love as grand and daring as the building she designed. This woman was a pragmatist. I'm terrified, Amelia whispered, of what comes next, of raising this child on my own, of being the woman who ruined San Francisco's visionary developer. Good. Being scared means you know what's on the line. Liam pulled back to meet her eyes. But you are not on your own. You have me. You have Isabel. You have our family. And now, heaven help us, you even have Harrison. What if I fail? What if you succeed? Amelia didn't have a response to that. She had not allowed herself to imagine winning, to imagine a life that wasn't defined by this conflict. Go take a very long, hot shower, Liam said kindly. Change into something that makes you feel like your old self. I'll get some food delivered. Then we plan our opening move. He was gone, and Amelia remained in the silence for one more minute. She was collecting her resolve, fortifying her soul for the fight that was coming. The shower was hot enough to sting, the steam a purifying cloud. She remained under the water until her skin was pink, until the last tear had been washed away, until she felt as though she had been scoured clean, all the way to her bones. She put on clothes from a box Liam had saved from her old apartment, a worn-out t-shirt from a local architectural firm that barely fit over her belly, and a pair of comfortable, faded jeans. She studied her reflection. She didn't fully recognize the woman with the determined glint in her eyes, looking back, but maybe that was for the best. She had spent 4 years playing the part of Mrs. Thorne. It was time to remember how to be Amelia. By 3 p.m., the story had gone viral. An inside source had dropped a bombshell data file to the city's leading financial journal. The SEC promptly declared a comprehensive investigation into Vance Capital. The firm's stock, once the golden child of Wall Street, nosedived 15% in less than 60 minutes. Board members were scrambling, either releasing panicked denials or tendering their resignations immediately. Their legal teams were uniformly offering no comment. Clara witnessed the implosion from her lawyer's high-rise office. Her attorney, Genevieve, was beside her, her phone buzzing incessantly. That wasn't my doing, Genevieve admitted, looking utterly stunned. My strategy was to file for an asset freeze in the morning, giving Arthur just enough leeway to incriminate himself with a fabricated public statement. So who leaked it? A message from one of Genevieve's contacts gave them the answer: his own father. He had opted to protect the future of his grandchild over shielding his son in the here and now. Clara could only gaze at the screen. Her father-in-law, a man whose life creed was the Vance legacy above all. The man who had been a power broker in New York for 4 decades. When the chips were down, he had chosen his bloodline over his brand name. The news broadcast shifted to a live view of the gleaming Vance Capital Tower. A swarm of journalists had laid siege to the entrance. Staff were seen pouring out, their expressions a mix of disbelief and fury. The dynasty was crumbling in real time. Arthur's face appeared on screen. A stock photo from an investor conference, looking self-assured and unbeatable. The wunderkind of New York finance. The news anchor's voiceover chronicled his astonishingly rapid demise. Insiders at the SEC are suggesting Arthur Vance could be facing federal indictments for securities fraud and embezzlement. His wife initiated divorce proceedings this morning, citing irreconcilable differences. His wife. The designation was still hers for a few moments more. Her phone began to vibrate. Arthur. This time, she answered, Clara. His voice was hollow, stripped of its typical arrogant certainty and filled with raw, desperate fear. Please, you need to let me give my side of the story. You can't just do this. The firm? My father. You don't understand the kind of pressure I was facing. I understand the decision you made, she replied, her voice as calm and cold as the Hudson River at sunrise. You made a decision every single day, and every single day you decided to lie to me. I love you. The sentiment was so hollow it bordered on absurd. It was a fabrication. It had been a fabrication from the start. No, Arthur. You loved the concept of me. The art curator wife. The ideal accessory for your public persona. The stabilizing force you needed to secure your latest round of capital. Her voice remained steady. You were never in love with who I am. You have no clue who I am. I can make this right. We can go to counseling. We can begin again. It's much too late for any of that. It was too late the moment I found the second cell phone, the one filled with all of your messages to her. A vast, weighty silence stretched between them, punctuated only by a noise she never thought she would hear from Arthur Vance. A broken, hopeless sob. Please, Clara. I'm about to lose everything. You already lost me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That took place months ago. You were just too consumed with your financial empire to even notice. She ended the call. The media went into a frenzy, a torrent of fresh accusations and expert analysis on the spectacular implosion of a hedge fund dynasty. At 5 p.m., the board of Vance Capital called an emergency meeting. At 6:30, they sent out a press release announcing Arthur Vance had been terminated as CEO, effective immediately. At 7, his father issued a public statement denouncing his son's shocking moral and financial irresponsibility and vowing to salvage the family's good name. At 8, his father arrived with the divorce papers. They are not contesting a single point, he stated, his tone flat and emotionless. You will receive 70% of all marital assets, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement, unconditional custody of the child, and Arthur is barred from any contact until a court-mandated psychiatric evaluation is finished. The Park Avenue apartment, the estate in the Hamptons, and absolute control of the charitable foundation are all yours. Clara skimmed the documents. It was everything she had fought for, every measure of justice she had sought. Arthur's access to the family trust has been frozen, citing the morality clause, his father continued. The trustees ratified it this morning. He is, for all intents and purposes, destitute, save for a handful of offshore accounts he thinks are hidden. And those accounts are now the focus of a federal probe. He's going to struggle to find a lawyer who won't demand a significant retainer. Clara affixed her signature to the document with a steady, deliberate hand. Her closest friend, Maria, poured them each a glass of mineral water. They did not propose a toast. This was not an occasion for celebration, but a quiet recognition that one chapter had closed, creating the space for another to begin. The full exposé was released online at 9 p.m. The entire scheme, the fraudulent shell corporations, the charity skimming, the psychological gaslighting, was exposed in excruciating, damning detail. By midnight, Arthur Vance's reputation was radioactive. Clara stood at the panoramic window, the New York City skyline glittering before her like a universe of shattered stars. She had actually succeeded. She had taken on a financial Goliath and his influential family, a dynasty that had been concealing its secrets for generations. She rested both hands on her pregnant stomach, and her son gave a powerful kick in response. It is over now, she whispered. He can no longer harm us. But even as she said it, she recognized it wasn't entirely true. The legal battle would be a long, exhausting ordeal, probably dragging on for months, maybe years. There would be invasive questioning, non-stop media scrutiny, and a vicious custody battle. Julian would not capitulate quietly. His father, a titan of Silicon Valley, would fund an army of lawyers to scrub the family name clean. The Croft dynasty, while tarnished, would wage a relentless war of public relations. But Elena held a truth they couldn't spin, the cold, hard facts. She was surrounded by friends who would be her bulwark. She had a son who would grow up knowing his mother was a warrior, not a victim. And that was everything she needed. A week later, Elena was at her OBGYN for a routine checkup. Her baby was thriving, his heartbeat a steady, powerful rhythm. "You've been navigating a tremendous amount of pressure," the doctor observed gently. "How are you managing, truly?" "I feel more centered than I have any right to," Elena admitted, pausing for a moment. "Is that strange? Shouldn't I be a complete wreck?" "There's no textbook way to handle a betrayal of this magnitude," her doctor said, scribbling a note on her tablet. "But frankly, you seem more at peace than I've seen you in a year." It was true. The hum of low-level anxiety that had been the background music of her pregnancy had finally gone silent. The sleepless nights, the constant sense of dread, the gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, it had all vanished. "I blamed it on pregnancy hormones," Elena murmured. "The worry, the paranoia. Julian always told me I was being overly sensitive. You were having a perfectly rational reaction to a toxic environment. Your intuition knew something was wrong long before your conscious mind could face it." Elena recalled all the nights she lay awake, telling herself the baby's kicking was keeping her up, or the mornings she felt a pit in her stomach when Julian came home smelling of a perfume she didn't wear. Her body had been sounding alarms, and she had systematically ignored them. Never again. From now on, her gut was her guide. That afternoon, she arranged to meet Maya for coffee. Everyone had warned her against it. Her sister, Julian's father, even her own mother, who harbored a complicated mix of anger and pity for her son-in-law. But Elena needed to see the woman who had played a role in her husband's elaborate lie. They met at a small, anonymous cafe in Hayes Valley. Neutral ground, far from the prying eyes of the tech blogs. Maya looked much older than her 27 years, her face lined with stress and sorrow. Her hand trembled as she lifted her cup. "I didn't know," she blurted out before Elena had spoken. "About the venture fund, the fraud investigation, about what he was doing with your foundation's money. I honestly believed—" She stopped, steadying her breath. "I honestly believed I was his real life. I thought you were the corporate merger. Is that what he told you? He wove a narrative I was desperate to believe." Maya's eyes welled with tears. "He claimed your marriage was a strategic alliance to appease his board. He swore that after the baby came, he'd file for divorce so we could finally be a proper family." "And your son?" "Leo?" The tears now fell freely. "He barely acknowledges his existence. He transfers funds from a Swiss account and has toys delivered by courier, but he never visits. He was never really there for us." Elena looked at the woman sitting across from her. She wasn't a monster or a homewrecker. She was another person, caught in the wreckage of Julian's deceptions. Someone else who had mistaken his masterful performance for genuine love. "I can't absolve you, Maya," Elena said, her tone flat and final. "I just can't. You knew he was a married man. You made a choice." Maya nodded, the image of exhausted resignation. "I know. But I also know I wasn't the only one he betrayed. You were his victim too, in a different way, but a victim all the same." A strange look passed over Maya's face, the lightness of a long-held confession, or maybe the crushing weight of it. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "My parents are in Portland. I'm taking Leo and heading home, starting over. Maya wiped at her cheeks. I don't want his money, not a single dollar. I just want to be free of him. Then you deserve that. There were no false pleasantries, no promises to stay in touch. Some divides were too vast to be bridged, but as Elena drove through the afternoon traffic toward the Golden Gate Bridge, she felt an unexpected lightness in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a kind of closure, a conscious decision to stop wasting her energy on a man who was never worthy of the space he took up in her life. The Pacific Heights mansion was waiting. Elna had hired her own architect, not the one Julian's mother had handpicked. She was choosing her own art, her own decor, her own story. Are you 100% sure you can handle this? Ava asked, loading the last of the boxes into the SUV. Not even close, but I have to, Elena replied, ripping a piece of packing tape with her teeth. The baby arrives in 4 weeks. I need to be settled in my own space. That house was never a home, sweetie. I know. But it's about to be. I'm filling it with my books, my music, my life. I'm taking it back. Ava wrapped her in a tight, long hug, the kind that wordlessly acknowledges the brutal journey of a crisis. You call me, for absolutely anything. I will. I mean it. 3 a.m, you need to yell at someone who isn't a newborn. You call me. I know, Ava. I love you. I love you more. Always. The drive from her friend's cozy Noe Valley apartment back to the imposing grandeur of Pacific Heights felt impossibly brief. Elena watched the charming, vibrant streets give way to the opulent, manicured cityscape. It was the same path she had driven in a fog of shock just weeks ago, but today it was all different. She had shown up at Ava's door, shattered into a million pieces. She was leaving now in a silence of her own choosing, one forged not from shock, but from pure, unshakable resolve. 3 months later, a new woman stood on the threshold of that mansion. In her arms, she held her son, Noah Valencia, a name from her side of the family, with no ties to the Croft dynasty. The house was transformed. The cold, minimalist steel and glass were gone, replaced with the warmth of reclaimed redwood and rich, textured fabrics. The imposing, aggressive modern art had been replaced with captivating pieces by emerging Bay Area artists, and everywhere there were photos, candid moments of happiness, not the polished portraits for society magazines. Elena took Noah to the massive bay windows that overlooked the glittering expanse of the bay. The view was identical, a breathtaking panorama of the city, but her place within it had been fundamentally altered. She realized the gilded cage had never been locked. She'd had the key all along. She just needed to find the courage to turn it. Noah began to stir, his tiny body signaling it was time to eat. Elena settled into a beautiful oak rocking chair her grandfather had built, the one her own mother had rocked her in. 3 generations of strong women, bound by a silent resilience. As she nursed her son, she thought of the person she had been, the one who would stand beside her husband at a glitzy tech conference 8 months pregnant, feeling like a decorative accessory, the one who, a week later, called a Sausalito art gallery to arrange delivery for a surprise anniversary gift, only to have the gallerist mention how delighted Mr. Croft had been with the other piece he'd bought last month for a Ms. Reed. That woman had been broken, lost, and clinging to the debris of a life she thought was real. This woman was none of those things. The doorbell chimed. It was Marcus, her attorney, for their weekly strategy session. He carried folders outlining the launch of her new foundation, now called the Valencia Trust. No more Croft, no more dirty venture capital money. Its inaugural grants had just been awarded, funding for architectural heritage sites and scholarships for women in design. Julian's indictment is scheduled for next month, Marcus said, his voice always calm and reassuring. The district attorney's office will be in touch about your testimony. I know. Are you prepared for it? Elena looked down at Noah's perfect, sleeping form. This was the child who would someday have to hear the whole story. Yes. She shifted the baby in her arms. One day he will ask me about his father, and I need to be able to look him in the eye and tell him that I spoke the truth, that I refused to be intimidated, that I stood for what was right and ensured he was held accountable. It's not going to be pleasant. His defense will try to paint you as vengeful, unstable. All the threats they made before, let them try. I have the financial records. I have the whistleblowers from his firm. I have nothing left to lose. Marcus allowed himself a small, proud smile. You're a different person, Elena. I just remembered who I was before I met him, she said, her gaze steady and clear. That woman was always here. She just got a little lost for a while. After Marcus left, Elena laid Noah down in his bassinet. She stood at the window, watching the fog roll in over the bay, cloaking the world in a soft, quiet embrace. Her phone vibrated. It was a text from a journalist at the Chronicle. You'll want to see tomorrow's paper. We won the Pulitzer. The expose, the series of articles that had dismantled the Croft Ventures myth, had just won the highest prize in journalism. A second text came through from an ally on the board of directors. It's official. The board has voted to dissolve the company. Marcus Thorne's real estate empire is now collapsing. The Chicago dynasty he built is finished. His legacy is a pile of rubble. His name is a punchline. Everything Marcus had ever put first, ahead of his wife, ahead of his unborn child, ahead of simple human decency, had been turned to ash. A final text lit up her screen from a number she didn't recognize. Sophia almost deleted it, but a flicker of curiosity made her open it. It was from the other woman. Thank you for not dragging me into the public court battle. I'm getting help. My daughter and I are safe. You gave us a path forward. Sophia set her phone aside. She returned to the nursery and listened to the steady, soft sound of Leo's breathing. She remembered that sickening moment she found the earring, the instant her world shattered, and understood it was never an ending. It was a demolition, clearing the way for a new beginning, about the discovery of a single, unfamiliar earring that tore her world down, about the expensive, delicate piece of jewelry that delivered a killing blow. She had attended that real estate gala as Marcus Thorne's pregnant wife, a gilded accessory meant to showcase his achievements. She walked away as herself, as Sophia, as a woman who would not be shattered. Her baby stirred, his little eyelids fluttered and then opened, his eyes finding his mother's, with a calm, knowing look. I'm going to tell you a story one day, Sophia whispered, about a woman who forgot her own recipe for happiness, who let a man convince her she was just a supporting ingredient in his grand feast, who almost let her own menu be written out of existence. Leo made a soft sound, his tiny hands uncurling, and I will tell you how she rediscovered her own kitchen, how she learned new techniques and created a beautiful life. From the scorched remains of her old one, she reached into the crib, gently stroking her son's face. That woman was me, your mother, and I want you to always remember that you are never too burned to rise again. You are never too lost to find your way back to your own table. You are never too quieted to find your own voice. Leo wrapped his small hand around her finger, gripping it with a power that felt like an anchor. We're going to be fine. Sophia said, we are going to be so much more than fine. We are going to be the master chefs of our own lives. The lights of Chicago began to glow against the darkening sky. A new night, a blank page. Sophia lifted her son, pulling him into an embrace, and felt a powerful, grounding peace settle over her. She had arrived at that awards gala as one person and left as another, and in the time since, she had taken back the one thing she thought was lost for good, herself. The end of that charade was the true start of her story, and she was eager to write the next course. The law office was a fortress, a line of television news, vans parked on the street below while reporters waited for a glimpse of what the city was calling the implosion of Chicago's real estate king. Marcus Thorne slumped at the polished mahogany table of the conference room, looking as if the weight of his own skyscrapers was crushing him. The bespoke suit that once projected power now seemed to swallow his diminished frame. His signature, shark-like grin had vanished, leaving only the grim set of his jaw. Sophia took her seat opposite him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Her son, Leo, was safe at her mother's, who'd flown in from Miami to watch over him. Her attorney methodically laid out the timeline of deceit, the hidden penthouse, the credit card statements for gifts she never received, the entire, meticulously crafted second life. It was all the proof she'd gathered in the weeks after finding that single, misplaced earring. Marcus's legal team did their best to discredit her, framing her as a vindictive spouse trying to seize control of his real estate empire. Guided by a cold, hard clarity, she answered every question with surgical precision, offering no drama, no tears, just bank records and security keycard logs. When the deposition was paused, she walked past the man she was divorcing. Marcus looked up, his face a pallid mask of fury. Was it worth it, he spat, to burn everything to the ground? She paused, her gaze locking with the man she once adored, the man who had shattered her trust, the man who had unknowingly forged her into something unbreakable. Your entire life was a lie held up by fraudulent scaffolding, Marcus. I just kicked out the supports. She turned and walked out of the law office and into the biting Chicago wind, into a future she would now build herself. The judge's decision took less than an hour, a summary judgment in her favor on all counts. He was ordered to pay a settlement of $40 million. Sophia felt no giddy rush of victory. There was no winning, only the deep, resonant feeling of a great wrong being righted. That night, she held her baby, Leo, in their modest rental overlooking Millennium Park, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. The mobile of tiny silver kitchen whisks she'd hung over his crib turned gently in the draft. She considered the future that had been demolished, and the one she was now free to create from her own recipe, the woman she had been, and the chef she was finally ready to become. The real estate titan's expectant wife had walked out of his awards gala in stony silence. By the following quarter, the Thorne Development's portfolio was in a catastrophic tailspin. But that was merely the appetizer, not the main course. The real story was about a woman who remembered her own five-star value, who rediscovered her own fire, and who crafted a new life from the ruins of a betrayal. The real story was about resilience, about courage, and about the incredible power that comes from refusing to be a footnote on someone else's menu any longer. Sophia kissed her son's temple, watching the skyline sparkle. Once upon a time, she whispered, there was a chef who was led to believe she was just a supporting ingredient in someone else's grand feast. But she was never just an ingredient. She was the master chef finalizing her own creation. Leo hummed softly in his crib, outside the city, thrummed with its relentless, vibrant pulse, and Sophia Rossi no longer. Thorne was finally, truly home. If this story moved you, if you felt Sophia's heartbreak and celebrated her triumph, you are in good company. Hundreds of our followers have found strength in narratives just like this. One drop, a comment, and tell us what would you do if you found a reservation for a romantic getaway for two that wasn't with you. I personally read each and every comment, and your story might spark our next one. If you are new to our community, we hope you'll consider subscribing and ringing that bell for all notifications. We serve up moving news stories every single week. Tales of strength, grit, and the quiet power of women who demand to be heard. Please share this with anyone you feel might need to see it, because sometimes a story is the exact recipe a person needs to begin cooking up their own destiny. And if this story in particular nourished your spirit, please give it a like. It helps our channel grow and allows more people to find these stories when they are hungering for them the most. A final thought: this content has been thoughtfully prepared. He had constructed a life on false foundations and empty promises, building a facade intended not to shelter, but to conceal, to control, and to serve his own ego. Sophia stared at the stack of evidence, at the story it told so clearly. He hadn't just been unfaithful in a marriage. He had built an entire world of deceit. And she was about to issue the demolition permit